So on Monday, I get an email from a colleague, and it's about a survey that the BBC have done. And in this survey, what they've done, they've looked at occupations or professions and looked at how happy people are in these occupations and professions. And they've done a list from 1 right the way down to 275 or something. And now the reason I got sent this, because I'm a shop steward in the civil service, and the guy who sent it me was a shop steward in the civil service. He says, hey, look, there's no civil servants on this list. You know, that's how unhappy we are. We don't even make 275 on this list. But I was quite interested to see who was at the top of the list, who the happiest group were. And they were the clergy. The clergy were the happiest group. The next happiest group, right underneath them, was what they called the chief executives and senior officers. Basically, the top bosses were extremely happy. So I thought, well, that's interesting. You look at happiness, you've got these people, they think they've got perhaps a direct line to God. They're doing God's work on earth, being directed by God. I'm referring, of course, to chief executives. And then you've got, only slightly happier than them, are the clergy. So you've got these very happy bosses. And I'm thinking, how come they're so happy? How come they're so happy? It's austerity Britain. What makes bosses so happy? Well, maybe it was the big salary, the 6-figure salaries, because you put, the mean earnings for these people alongside them. And these chief executives have got the massive salary. Nobody came close. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Money can't buy me love, says the Beatles, but, it can buy you some happiness, obviously. But is it just that? And then I thought of something that Churchill had said. And for those under 40, I mean the fat guy with a cigar, not the dog that tries to sell you insurance, right? And Churchill says, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I thought, maybe it's something to do with that. Because what we've got the government that's telling us that there is no alternative to austerity, and we have to face these cuts. Our services have to be cut, jobs have to be cut. There isn't the money there to provide all the services that the other speakers have talked about. And on the coattails of that, we've got the bosses coming in and giving us a good kicking, haven't we? So on Tuesday, we get told inflation is at an all-time low. I thought, wow, isn't that exciting? I bet people are whistling on the way to the food banks when they hear that one, aren't they? Right? But on the TUC website, it says, we've now faced the longest fall in living standards, the longest cut in real wages since the 1870s. Alan talked about going back to Victorian times. The 1870s, an average worker is getting £9 in pay for every £10 they were getting before the crash. Pay packets are about the same level that they were 10 years ago. So they are, they're kicking our wages, aren't they? But it's not the same for everyone. Oh no, they're doing all right. Again, the TUC, between 2000 and 2013, the pay gap between the top 10% and the bottom 10% of earners in the West Midlands rose by 7%. The gap is getting greater. 7% in the West Midlands. That's higher than the national average, which is 5%. It's increasing by. It's probably not that our bosses are getting more around here. They're just giving us a better kick in at the bottom, perhaps. So the rich are getting richer. So no wonder they're bloody happy, right? And then you look at job security, there's been said, how many of us feel secure in our jobs? I bet if you're at work, your sick scheme's been looked at. They've had a look at that. Can we tamper with that? Can we change that? Can we look at your discipline and grievance procedures? We'll change those. And then, of course, we get the whole thing about restructuring, or process engineering, as they call it. If you're in an office, maybe there used to be 10 of you in the office, now there's only 8 of you, but you're still doing the same amount of work. Or if you're in a school, you're being expected to do more activities and more clubs for the same sort of money. And then, as we've heard, you try and fight back there, you get dismissed, you get sacked, and there's 79% fall in the number of cases going to employment tribunals. And as we say, these cases aren't being settled over a cup of tea in the works canteen. People are just too vulnerable and can't take cases in there. So what we've got is a concerted attack by the government on our terms and conditions, cutting our services, trying to drive us back and take away all the gains that we've made since the 1940s. And we're seeing that in the wider issue, but we're also seeing it in the workplace with what the employers are doing. And I would argue that it's the same attack. It's the same use of austerity as a way of cutting back, making gains for their side, taking the gains off us. Now, I'd like to wipe the smile off those bosses' faces, and I expect a number of you around here do. That's why you're here today. So how are we going to do it? And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. But I think key to that fight back will be the trade unions. For all their faults, they're still a very large organisation, 6.5 million members, I believe. You know, biggest voluntary organisation, bigger than any of the political parties. They have some clout, we have resources, we're able to organise campaigns, we have a wider influence. Often it'll be the unionised workplaces that are affecting pay levels for those around that aren't. And we have an interest in communities and in working people. And a lot of people seem to think that, you know, community politics and getting involved in the communities is something new for trade unions. It's something they've just latched onto. But Shropshire and Telford Trades Council was formed in 1948. It didn't have the Telford bit then, it was just Shropshire. But you talk to some of the old boys about it, and all throughout the time that the trades councils existed, like the local TUC, it's fought for houses and schools and hospitals and jobs. It's been involved in those type of community campaigns. And so trade unions will have to be at the forefront of any fight back. But that isn't to say there are some problems with the trade unions. I think most of us are rather disappointed at the lack of combativity of trade unions. You know, they seem to be more interested in appeasing people than fighting back. And, you know, a lot of us are really appalled at the way they squandered the opportunity to give the government a good kicking when we had the big disputes over pensions and we had 1 million public sector workers out. You know, they wasted that opportunity. So we've got a lot to do if we're going to get good fighting trade unions. Now, last couple of weeks we've lost a couple of good comrades on the left. You know, Tony Benn has gone, who inspired many people in this room, I'm sure. I believe it was his funeral today. And we lost Bob Crow. Now, I think the stuff around Bob Crow was very interesting, actually, the BBC coverage. And I was coming home from work on the day he went, and the BBC had got Eric Morecambe lookalike Nick Robinson on the radio. And he was talking about the RMT and Bob's legacy. And it started off, actually, it was just a load of cliched stuff, you know, jellied eels and all that sort of, you know, dinosaurs and all that sort of stuff. But what I did say about Bob, he says, well, actually, Bob's members, RMT members on the underground, throughout the recession, they've maintained their level of pay. Bob Crow and his members, they've maintained their terms and conditions. This is very unusual because everybody else has seen theirs cut. He then goes on to talk about the number of strikes that Bob Crow and the RMT have been involved in. And he kind of wants to put them over there as some kind of strange aberration. You know, there's some pathological desire by RMT members to really upset communities in the capital. You know. Now, Nick Robinson is not as daft as he looks, is he? You know, I mean, nobody could be that stupid. So he's there telling us that you've got the strikes over here and you've got the terms and conditions over here, and he's desperately trying to keep it apart. But, you know, the fact of the matter is they had protected their terms and conditions, they had protected their pay because they were able and willing and capable and organised enough to take industrial action. But I think the most important report, or the best report, was on Newsnight. Now, Newsnight wheel out this guy called Danny Finkelstein. I don't know if you've seen him on there, Lord Finkelstein, I think he's now. He's a Conservative. And whenever they need a Tory to come on, you know, how does the budget pay in the shires and all this sort of stuff, on he comes. So they ask him about Bob Crow. And he said this brilliant thing. He says, well, Jeremy, it's not an exact quote, but you know, you get the flavour. He says, Bob Crow was a Marxist. He understood how capitalism worked, and so he strove to make sure he had a monopoly supply on labour, and then when he got it, he exploited it to the hilt. And I thought, isn't that brilliant? You know, here we have a Tory who's able to explain what trade unionism is all about. We create a monopoly supply of labour in order to drive through our demands. Absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. And it was great to hear it from him, because so many on our side, trade union leaders, seem to have forgotten that. They seem to think that what we're all about is looking after, you know, getting Labour elected, and that will somehow protect us. Or we spend a lot of our time doing individual casework. Now, that's very important. I'm not knocking that. But we do it at the expense, maybe, of building a collective response to the struggle. So, you know, here we got these Tories saying what you need monopoly supply of labour. The idea that we all get together and we tell the gaffers we ain't going to take it unless you back down, we're not going to go back to work. That's the sort of organisation that we need to build. And we're very shortly going to be seeing in our councils consultative ballots on whether they're going to take action about a 1% pay rise. Now, I would say, everyone in this room, if you're against austerity, you need to be supporting those council workers fight for a decent pay rise and supporting that ballot to take industrial action. Because if they take on the Tories and win on pay, they are taking on the argument that we have to take austerity, that things have to be this way. They're taking on the argument that says you have to take cuts. Because if the council workers can win and say we're not taking a cut, then we can say we don't have to cut the health service, we don't have to cut libraries, we don't have to cut daycare centres. The logic of the cuts, the logic of austerity gets challenged. This idea of, don't let a good crisis go to waste, we can start rolling that back. So what I'd say is the fight within the workplace and within the communities is the same fight. If you're in a workplace, you need to be involved in the community campaigns to defend services. If you're defending services and supporting the campaigns, you need to be active in your trade union. If you've got one, join the trade union if you can and support trade unionists fighting back. And then maybe, if we do that, we can wipe the smile off those bosses' faces, and next time we do this survey, a lot more of us will be at the top of the scale, happy and smiling. Thank you very much, comrades.